Welcome to The Impact Equation, conversations with leaders shaping a brighter future, with me, Adam Pike.
And me, Rafi Adelstone. With our special guests, we unlock the secrets of those who dare to transform our world. We talk to architects of change, pioneers in their fields, working towards a brighter future for us all. In each episode, we dig into each element of the impact equation.
Today is a very special episode of The Impact Equation. We're at JW3, the Jewish Community Centre for London, on the Finchley Road, and we're recording this with a live audience as part of the Jewish Labour Movement conference. And for this very special episode, we are delighted to welcome a special guest, Mete Coban, Deputy Mayor of London for Environment and Energy.
Mete was born in Northern Cyprus to asylum-seeking parents and moved to London as a child. Inspired to give marginalised groups a voice, aged just 20, he founded My Life, My Say, a charity to amplify youth voices and engage young people from underrepresented communities in decision-making. Mete's campaigning led to nearly 500,000 people registered to vote in the last general election, and he received an MBA for services to young people. Mete entered politics aged just 21, as the youngest ever elected councilor in the London Borough of Hackney, where he served as cabinet member for climate change, environment and transportation. And in July last year, recently after coming along to the JLM conference, Mete was appointed Deputy Mayor of London, tasked with overseeing climate action for our city. Mete is a good friend of JLM and a regular speaker and attendee of events. Mete, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Great stuff. So we like to start with a bit of personal backstory. Perhaps let's start with your upbringing, if you don't mind. Tell us a bit about your upbringing, your family life, what brought you to London, and what's influenced your commitment to impact.
Yeah, I think firstly, just to start by saying also thank you to the Jewish Labour Movement for all their support over the years. I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't had the support of the movement. And, you know, I think one of the things from coming from a minoritized community in London is the sort of the strength that we have in the partnership working across different communities. And one of the great things of being brought up in a place like Hackney is that it's a very diverse borough. You know, I remember we come from a very small village in Cyprus. I was only 2, so I can't, remember a lot. But my mum always says, when we came to Hackney, it was almost like the world in one borough. It's very diverse. It's got the highest number of Haredi Jewish community in Western Europe and the Western world. You've got a huge number of Vietnamese Londoners who live in Hackney, huge Black African Caribbean community, massive Turkish Kurdish, Turkish Cypriot community. It's a very, very diverse borough, over 100 languages that are spoken. And I think there's something really special in the shared experiences that we have as migrant communities, all come to Hackney and call this place our home and London our home, at different stages of sort of the timeline over the last 100, 200, 300 years. But, we've built our city and our neighborhoods in a way that sort of reflect the very best of our communities. And when I was growing up, I had a youth club in our neighborhood, which basically was available for all boys and girls from the estates. I'm from a ward which has got the highest number of estates in terms of density. And the youth club was really important to us because it wasn't just a place where you go play badminton, pool, or you get to sort of socialize with your mates. This was somewhere where, for many of us, it was a second home. While mum and dad were working late, my dad's a cab driver. My mum used to work in a textile factory down the road in Stamford Hill, actually. For us, because they'll be working till 9 o'clock. We used to go there every single day after school. It's where we learned how to communicate with other people, how we learned to deal with our feelings and our emotions. It was more than just a place of playing sports. It was something that was fundamentally so important to the community. I remember one day it shut down because of the cuts that came through government in 2010.
How old are you at this point?
I was probably about going on to 18. Yeah. And at that point, for me, it was how could this place, which has been serving this community for over 35 years, literally thousands of young people, no one's lifted a finger and no one cares. And it's almost like we're abandoning all of these working class children who are no longer going to have access to the sort of the benefits that we enjoyed. So that got me really thinking about, okay, either you get involved and do something, or just don't complain about it. And, I was very lucky that I had some really good friends in the area who, convinced me to join the Labour Party. My family was always like kind of naturally Labour leaning anyway. But it just the process of how do you even go about like joining a party? No one's ever taught us that. What is a councillor? I only found out what a councillor was 6 months before I stood for election. And when they first told me, do you want to be a councillor? I thought they were talking about, like whether it's like therapy or something else. I didn't think it was that type of councillor. And that's partly the problem we have with the world right now, right? Or like the UK, which is that there are loads of people from marginalised communities who aren't educated about how democracy works in this country. And unless you're lucky enough to have parents who are plugged into the system or you follow the system, if your parents are working late or they don't speak English, in my case, for example, they don't understand how democracy works, you're just left like completely sort of blank about how the whole system works. And so, there's a whole generation of young people who are growing up in this country who essentially their voices are marginalised, and it's the same people who are engaging with the system. And that's why we need to do much more to broaden out our engagement. And that's one of the things that I'm most passionate about doing.
What was it about you, though, that as a teenager, you decided this is, not only is this a problem, but I'm going to do something about it? What was it? That's a very special thing. What was it about your upbringing or about you as a person that drove that?
Yeah, I think, look, there were lots of different events that happened, like as a kid, like when I was growing up, that made me start to think that life has to be much more purposeful. One of the things that I often talk about, it's a very difficult story to tell. Like it makes me really emotional when I still talk about it. But I remember once Dad was working in construction, and he'd work in cash and hand job. And I must have been like maybe 13, 14, it was half term, a Friday. And he said, son, I'm getting paid today. Come with me to work. And at the end of the day, I'll get you a gift on the way back home. Cut long story short, I remember Dad was waiting in the queue to get paid. And, his employer had said to him, Ramsey, I don't really like the work you've done today. So instead of giving you £300, I'm only going to give you £150. And till this day, I'll never forget the look that Dad gave me. And there's nothing he could do. He had a sense of, no sense of security because it was a cash in hand job, couldn't speak English. And he had this real sense of shame. I remember when he looked at me, and I had to pretend my whole life that I acted oblivious to it, that I didn't know what had happened, that I didn't hear what had happened. And I just think those moments, I remember going home and telling my mum about what happened. And I remember she said to me, like, son, what can we do for you? Me and your dad were trying really hard. Now it's down to you to go out there and actually take it to the next level. This is as far as we can take it. And I just remember, like, at that very early age thinking there has to be a much more purpose to life. And, ours is just a fraction of thousands of families and what they have to go through. We're not even the worst of it. And for me, that was the moment I started to think about actually being a voice in my community.
You talked about being very involved in after-school activities. Can you tell us a bit about the people, the youth leaders? Because so much comes from not just the teachers, but people that are running those after-school clubs, and that feeds through into the kind of the movement you've built, which is My Life, My Say, which I think we'll get into in a little bit. But could you, unpack for us the people and the place, bringing it to life a little bit?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest tragedies that we have, I think, in the more modern era in the city that we live in today is that, one of the challenges we face is how do you retain that sense of community, that sense where, everyone in the neighborhood knows each other beyond like sort of the teachers, like you say, the real sort of like people who can have a positive influence. And one of the people who had a positive influence in my life was a lady called Denise Reed. And she used to be a social worker in my school. And, back then we had social workers, which was amazing in schools. We don't have that now. And, I grew up in a very difficult household in the sense that my parents done everything they can do for me, but we served at the same time 7 notices to be deported back to Northern Cyprus. So I suffered from a lot of separation anxiety as a child, like going to school and, like literally being in tears till my parents picked me up because I'd be worried that they would be sort of like arrested while I was at school and then they'll be sent back to Cyprus without us and we'll be separated. And there's all sorts of complexities around why. It's partly because Northern Cyprus is not recognised as a country, so our papers weren't recognised by the Home Office. And that's why it got really complicated with us. But Denise, like the ability to just have someone, it was almost like having a therapist at school who just, sat me down, I didn't get punished in school because, like you go to school and you're not happy and you're not smiling because of what's going on at home and you're worried and anxiety. Sometimes what happens is children get punished for it and they get excluded and they get, like put to detention. Whereas one of the things that we were most lucky with is people like Denise who were able to take the time and really to try to understand, why is Mete not attentive at school? Why is he not speaking out? Why is he not talking? Why is he not contributing to the class? There must be something underlying here. So having that space where, being able to actually interact with Denise, that made a massive difference in my life. And I think, there's so many people like Denise in my community, like from the youth club and St. Matthias and all these places that I think have had, that I'm very lucky about my upbringing.
So tell us what happened. So you finished school, and then what did you do next? How did it get to being an activist?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of got very engaged in the sort of aftermath of the youth club being shut down. And then that also then coincided with the time when EMA was also scrapped. And again, EMA had a massive positive influence for like lots of young people on my estate and my neighborhood.
Allowance people got.
Yeah. And that was the £30 a week that you'd get. I used to feel minted after getting that 30 quid. I used to work
those.
Yeah, it's a lot. No, because I used to work in Chelsea Stadium, match days, food kiosk, first job.
So you're an Arsenal fan, I'd say.
Yeah, I know. But like, I used to do Emirates Stadium sometimes, to be fair. And you get 60 quid for doing a match day. And then you get 30 quid from EMA as a 16-year-old. Back in like 2008, 2009. I mean, you could do a lot with like quid a week. Yeah. And so I remember when EMA had shut, like when they scrapped it, again, it was just like a sense of injustice for, I was lucky, I benefited from it. But then it's like, what about the next generation? How can they, like, they're going to lose this access? That now means their parents have to think about, supporting them to go to college or to sixth form. And so I got really involved in the protests. I went to the protests in central London. And that was like, my first kind of real entry into sort of politics and like kind of free students' unions and stuff. And then, yeah, very quickly, the 2013 selections came up for candidates in Hackney. And I wanted to be a representative for my ward in Stoke Newington, where I'm from. And I put myself forward. And, like, I remember people saying to me, oh, well, maybe you get like an unwinnable seat, get a bit of experience. But when you're that age, it's weird because like, I'm not the same now. And I wish I had some of the qualities like back then where I felt so fearless. Like I had nothing to lose. And it was like, fine, if I don't get selected, so what? That's okay. I'm putting my case forward. It's not all about being selected. We need to hear a voice. And, at the time, the average age of a councillor in the UK was 66. And I was like, how can we have all these issues that we know that are disproportionately impacting young Londoners, whether it's like the rent prices, house prices, the fact that, you're never going to be able to get a social home no more if you're like a young person who's brought up in a social housing, unless you've got very serious like circumstances. All of these issues that are disproportionately impacting young people, surely we've got to have more young people in politics. And so, again, like being the party of equality, one of the great things I love about the Labour Party and why it made me feel so welcome at a very young age was that, people welcomed that in a way that probably they wouldn't have welcomed that in any other political party or any other society, where it was like, oh, like here's a 20-year-old, 21-year-old person who wants to represent his community. And, I wasn't expecting anyone to give me any special favors, but all I wanted from them was just hear me out, just like you hear out anyone else in their 30s or 40s.
I'm interested because back in 2013, sort of Instagram and TikTok weren't necessarily thought of. Whereas obviously if you were standing for election, say that would have been a central plank of your campaigning. So how did you stand out? How did you get over the line in that election, become the youngest councillor?
Yeah, I remember so many memories. I remember actually like doing writing letters to residents and making so many rookie grammar mistakes as well, because back then you didn't have all these tools and I was still very young. And yeah, I mean, hopefully none of those letters resurface.
So Hackney residents, send one in.
But yeah, I mean, look, I think the difference with my campaign was primarily when we were running was going to where people are. Where do people go to in their day-to-day social and digital lives? Primarily not digital back then, but like day-to-day social lives. We have some incredible organizations in Hackney, especially be it like our faith institutions, because, most of our sort of like mosques, place of worship, churches, synagogues, all of our, and places of non-worship as well, they're all beyond just being a place of worship. They like serve as an important tool for the community. They provide food for the homeless. Whenever there's an emergency response, these are sort of the groups who've got the infrastructure that can really get things moving. So for me, it was like, when I was running, it was actually going and speaking to them, actually being visible. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do now as deputy mayor. Is like the number one thing is like people need to see you, they need to engage with you, they need to feel the sense that actually like you're there with them and you're actually listening to what they're saying. So I think the visibility and just bringing that energy and the dynamism, and also like being different, a sense of difference, and also like sounding very London and sounding very Hackney, I think that made a big difference for a lot of people when I first stood.
Awesome. So tell us a bit more about My Life, My Say. How did it start? How did it grow? What were your successes?
Yeah, so I guess like really building on from sort of my upbringing and how I got into politics, I think, the importance of My Life, My Say was that, my story is just one story. There are hundreds of thousands of people right across the country, all different lived experiences, who feel like their voice don't matter. And actually that there's so many big things that are happening across our country, whether it's the impact of Brexit, you look at what's happening right now with the far right on the rise and the impact that's having on our communities and the anxiety that's causing across so many of our communities here in London, but also across the country, the impact of climate change and the betrayal for future generations if we don't take the right steps now. And it was a sense of like, okay, do you know what? We need to have an organization that could really be a voice for young people, where young people, it's youth-led, and young people can actually organize themselves and say, here are our priorities and how can you, as politicians, really take our generation seriously. So when I was at university, you have loads of like politics societies and across different universities, but anyone who's involved in societies, and nothing to take away from societies, is that it's so bogged down in like, structure and bureaucracy in so many weird ways. Absolutely. Whereas actually it's like, what young people want is the ability to sort of like be very quick, agile, move and do things fun. Let's make politics fun. Like, let's go to where young people are. Like, where do they go to in their day-to-day social digital lives? And so we started organically when I was at university, across 3 different universities, doing a couple of events.
Where were you? Where was this?
I was at Greenwich University. And then in 2015, we had the general election. And that was like, we ran a campaign called Be the Change, which was around like getting young people registered to vote. And that really took off in a weird way. It wasn't huge, and we don't really know what the impact of it was in terms of like, because we didn't have the infrastructure back then to like measure how many young people we registered to vote. But we got a lot of like press coverage and everything. So in the end, it was like, we started off as this thing of doing events, and it was like, okay, but what is this thing going to be? Also, I was finishing uni, a few other people were finishing uni. And so we sort of thought, okay, well, what can we make My Life, My Say? And how do we create? We knew that one of the big gaps that we have in the UK is that there's a huge issue of like low youth participation, not because young people don't care. Of course, they care about the issues that affect them. Of course, they care about having a decent roof over their head or a job that pays them basic respect or dignity. The problem is they don't see traditional forms of politics as a vehicle to address the issues they care about, partly because they're not educated about democracy in this country, partly because there's an issue around representation, and partly because there's an issue around trust. So how do we actually get young people to lead a movement? And so we basically, over the 10 to 11 years, we've like exponentially sort of grown. Now it's the biggest youth engagement charity in the UK and Europe. We literally like regularly travel to places like the United Nations, the US government, to White House to really do, to talk about best practice and the work that we're doing. We have no aspiration to work outside of the UK. Our sole focus is obviously to try to engage young people here, but being able to share some of the expertise of what we've done. And I think we do things fun and we do it differently. Like we worked with Tinder, with the dating app. So if you're swiping left or right, you can register to vote. Tinder app by itself over 2 days had over 80,000 voter registrations that we had. We worked with, for example, Lime Bikes. Lime Bikes activated a code for young people to go to the polls for free, for example. That was incredible. And also had like push notification on the app. Yeah. Ben & Jerry's had their own battle bus that went around the country, giving out ice cream to young people, raising awareness around democracy. We had cinemas, Pearl and Dean cinemas. Basically, we had a campaign called You Already Vote, So Vote. And the idea was that in the last 12 months, 74% of 18 to 34-year-olds have voted in one form of reality TV show or another, whether it's, Celebrity Get Me Out of There, whatever it is. Whereas compared that to elections, only 3 in 10. And so we worked with all of these celebrities, reality TV stars who were like, you voted for me on the island, or you voted for me in the jungle. This is your reality. Go and vote now. So, actually trying to make politics more fun. And so in the end, we had 488,846 young people directly registered to vote just through our campaign alone.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And My Life, My Say, I was reading about democracy cafes as a means of engagement. How does that work? How do you get people talking with one another? Because again, one of the big issues right now is the inability for people to have dialogue, to talk across different issues with one another. So it seems like you're creating quite a special place there. but I've never been to one. So could you bring it alive for us?
Yeah, it's incredible and amazing, and it's feels very sort of like informal gatherings of young people. Essentially, Democracy Cafe really started off with the idea of, reinvigorating the sort of 17th century concept of talking about issues in your community over coffee, but doing it in a place where, like young people would go to socialize. So we originally started with a partnership in 2015 with Starbucks. And the concept was that you could talk about politics over frappuccinos. Young people love frappuccinos. You'd be surprised how much the frappuccinos is a magnet for a lot of young people. And so it was really cool because if you were to go to a Democracy Cafe, we cap it at 30 people. We sort of flip the concept of having a panel of experts talking to young people about issues affecting them to sort of making it about everyone's a speaker in a Democracy Cafe. Mm-hmm. So if you go to a Democracy Cafe, there'll be like 5 groups of 6 or 6 groups of 5. And it'll be running different rounds. There's democracy in action. So in the first round, they dictate the agenda of the session. So what will happen is have a list of 10 different topics. So the NHS, mental health, whatever it may be. Every group will vote for top 3 topics. Whichever top 3 topics are chosen, that will then be the agenda for the rest of the Democracy Cafe, which gives a sense of it's participant led. Sometimes you get MPs that go to the Democracy Cafes. We will tell them to not reveal that they're an MP because a lot of the young people in their community might not even know that that's their MP. Mm-hmm. They'll have a full-on, chat with, they'll be part of the conversation. At the end, they'll be like, oh, by the way, so-and-so was your MP. And it was like, it's really empowering because they've been able to sort of like get what's off their chest and talk about their ideas.
Great.
And so it's a very sort of, informal conversation, and it's all designed around sort of creating space for young people to feel like going to where young people are and letting them lead the conversation rather than dictating to them.
Amazing. It would be great to move on to talk about your role as a cabinet minister for climate in Hackney. Tell us more about the role as it was, the mandate you had, and how on earth you get to grips with an issue like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky to have served in Hackney. I say lucky, privileged and honoured to have served in Hackney. I'm very Hackney, in the sense that, right from like, I always say to people, it's like, as an individual, you have many identities, right? You can be like, I'm Muslim, I'm a Londoner, I'm a Hackney boy, I'm Turkish Cypriot, I'm British, all those things. But number one is Hackney, always for me. Probably my Muslim friends shouldn't hear that.
Or your mum.
But yeah, exactly. But one of the things about serving in my community that I loved was the ability to actually do things that make a difference in your community that you could see literally overnight. So when I was a cabinet member for environment transport in Hackney, I oversaw public realm. I oversaw waste services, so street cleaning, making sure people's bins are getting collected, very important issues for a lot of people locally. I oversaw obviously our highway network and parking in Hackney. I oversaw a lot of the work we're doing around green infrastructure on our public realm too, and energy efficiency. And so, we were able to do some real like, transformative projects that really made a big difference to people's lives. Like we're out and brought up in Stoke Newington. In Stokey, for example, we were able to semi-pedestrianize Church Street. As a result of doing that, what we've seen is that Visa MasterCard transactions have gone up by 200% on the street. And that was part of a project to revitalize Church Street. The other bit that we saw was that footfall went up by 18%. Cycling went up by, I think it was like 30 to 35%. Traffic reduction was down about 30 to 35%. Every single air quality monitor that we had in the area, even including on the boundary roads as well, also saw significant levels of reduction of nitrogen dioxide levels as well. So better air quality, better for business, better overall in terms of like the whole neighborhood. And it's really creating a sense of like, actually you can do things that really make a difference. I think that's one of the if I were to, and we'll probably talk about this more as we talk about my new role, but one of the things I love about local government is like you're literally there, like everything you do, like we went fortnightly waste collections because we know we need to do more around recycling. So for refuse collections, we collect it every 2 weeks, and for recycling bags, we collect it every week. And that was seen as like a big move. And every borough has different rules. But as a result of doing that, working with our behavioural change team as well and supporting residents, we've seen that actually our recycling rates in Hackney went up by 7% literally within 2 months. Quite transformative. So it's like things that you could tangibly do around sort of air quality, transport, how people manage their waste, like really bringing the streets to life by increasing access to green space and to nature. Because a lot of people like me, again, who do not have access to garden space, it's really important that we create these, community gardens as well. So lots that we can do as councillors. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's formidable, the work that councillors do every day, because they're the ones on the front line who are essentially, they're sort of seeing the change.
But obviously the challenge is it's postcode lottery, right? It's postcode lottery as to who your cabinet minister is for climate. So what are the pressures that are on local government that prevent some of these transformations happening?
So I guess the challenge for any cabinet member who's particularly leading on sort of the climate portfolio is that often the issues around poverty is seen as disconnected to climate change, and they're not. Climate change is a social justice issue. If you think about food prices going up, it's related to the impact of climate change. If you think about, for example, energy prices, the fact that we don't have sustainable energy markets, again, related to climate change. So there are lots of impacts that are sort of overlap. And I think often they're sort of seen as, or they're being sort of portrayed to be two different complete issues, which they're not. And there is an overlap there. So I think the problem is where you're facing with like the challenges around budget pressures, which a lot of councils have been for the last 14 years, and they're having to make very difficult decisions. What then happens is, and I was very lucky because I worked in a very progressive council, which had a big mandate to deliver on a very progressive Green New Deal in Hackney, which put forward to the public, had support. We delivered a £61 million Green New Deal. And so we were able to fall back on the fact that we had the public support to do that. But I guess if you're working in a different borough, and everywhere is different and it's got its own set of unique challenges, is people will challenge you and say, well, Rafi, I know it's important that we do, tackle the climate crisis, but right now we've got serious housing issues and, a backlog of XYZ. Maybe another time, let's focus more of our resources on this. And I think the role that you have to play as a politician in that role is being able to actually say to people, of course, damp and mold is a big issue. That's why we need to get our retrofit right? Mm-hmm. And so it's about actually drawing the link to a lot of the issues and how it overlaps. And actually, if we can, really address the impacts of climate change, but also talk about it positively. So in my new job, one of the things that I really want to do is, I think when we talk about climate change or the green transition, we often talk about it from a very much sort of from a negative, it's the doom and gloom. And what then happens is it becomes really overburdening for a lot of people, because it's Mete, I'm the little man in the room. What can I do? Go pick on the big companies. But actually, we're not just doing the transition because we have to. We're doing it because fundamentally, right, the green transition uplifts every community. And I'll tell you how. For example, we've got a big program of retrofit coming in London, which is going to be announced very soon. We get it right, we're talking a retrofit revolution that is going to help reduce, energy bills for literally hundreds and thousands of council tenants across the city, which will be transformative in terms of their standard of living and their cost of living. If you think about, for example, residents who don't have access to garden space, how do we sort of green our public realm? How do we sort of create more access to green space? How do we clean our rivers so people can, if they want to swim, not all of it, you might want to. Again, more than 94% of Black Londoners can't swim. That's a social injustice issue. We have to, that is a social justice issue. So we have to really think about all of these issues that interlink. So I think there's massive opportunities that come with the transition. And if you think about the future jobs, right? If you think about a district heat network, that's a job that you're gonna have for 30, 40 years. That's the new sort of 30, 40 year job. How do we really create a new generation of skilled workforce across London that is going to able to benefit from it?
So let me ask you about the time horizon thing then. So, you're appointed as Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy.
Yeah.
And that's a 4-year post?
4 years, yeah.
4 years. So 2030 is obviously an important date, but the climate crisis and the quality crisis is one that goes on forever. How do you balance sort of things that you need to do in the next 4 years to prove your delivery versus the sort of medium-term, longer-term transformation that we need to see?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, look, 2030 is a very ambitious target, but I think, in order to really sort of be able to reach the levels that we need to not exceed the 1.5 degrees that's been put out by the United Nations, then, we need to have ambitious targets, because that's what moves the machine. I'm very lucky that I work for a mayor who has made this really at the heart of his mayoralty. I think sometimes when you're in politics, and a lot of people will tell you this, is and I've been very lucky in my Hackney role too, it's just you can end up having to try to pick your battle with the leader, in terms of trying to get FaceTime and say, can you actually put this as like a priority in terms of your mayoralty. But, Sadiq is very, very passionate about climate change. And, in many ways, like with the work he done on ULEZ, for example, he shows his conviction through the fact that he's not just got into politics, just kicking the can down the road. He's actually gone into politics because he actually wants to do things that's going to, drastically improve the lives of Londoners. And so I think we had a very ambitious manifesto going into the 2024 election, and Sadiq's majority increased as a result of that. We've got a big mandate to deliver on our environmental ambitions, be it around cleaning our rivers in the next 10 years. So that's a great example of something, for example, that we know that it's going to take more than the 2028 term that Sadiq is there till, but actually it's the right thing to do, and we need to have a comprehensive plan for how we can clean our rivers in the next 10 years and reduce pollution levels in our waterways. So that's a really good example. But then also, we've got lots of work that we need to do around the EV charging infrastructure across our city, the retrofit revolution, the work we need to do, our circular economy, the work we need to do around sort of the green spaces. How do we sort of the government's got massive ambitions around building housing. How do we then use that as an opportunity, for example, to unlock, more resources into sustainable urban drainage systems across our city to really make it a sponge city, and to also help clean our waterways as we impact the impacts of climate change. So there's lots of opportunity, and there are things that I'm focused on that is manifesto delivery, but then there's also things that, for example, some of the forward thinking things that, 10, 15, 20 years ahead, like we were talking about the Thames barrier, for example, and the new barrier that will need to come in 2070 to help protect Londoners from the impacts of flooding.
Amazing. So, Mete, getting towards the end of our time together and reflecting back on the earlier part of our conversation, we talked about the role that you played as a young person. Turning to young people in Britain today, as I say young people, I sound very old myself, so forgive me. But what advice do you have for people that have the same burning desire to change something but don't know where to start? And how different would starting look like today than it did for you back in 2010?
Yeah, I think it's interesting with this conversation, because I think often when I talk to people, when I speak to young people or other people who just curious to find out about how I ended up where I am, I think they think that I had it figured out, and I actually didn't have it figured out. I think the truth is that sometimes, whether you're starting a social enterprise or a charity, or whether you're thinking about your own personal career, I think sometimes what happens is you sort of can end up in this trap where you try to have a perfect strategy or perfect answer to, or perfect roadmap to where you want to get to. And I think fundamentally, as long as you get the fundamentals right in terms of where you want to head, I think the key thing is just get out there and keep doing different things, and you're going to fail lots, and that's totally fine. That's part of the learning, and that's builds resilience, and it builds so many sort of strengths within you that you otherwise would not have had. But the really key thing is, what I would always advise young people is, think of yourself as a business. For example, I was listening to this great conversation with the founder of Deliveroo. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, it's just really interesting, right? He was saying that he used to work in the city, and he used to hate the fact that he used to get cold sandwiches when he used to work late. When Just Eat first founded, he was like, this is great because, you can order hot food. He immediately recognized two problems with Just Eat. One was that you don't recognize the restaurants on the app. The second thing was that it could take forever and you don't know where your rider is. So he created Deliveroo, specifically focusing on the gaps that Just Eat had, and really strengthening that. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that two things. One is, you don't always have to come up with the new best idea. That's just, any inventor would have been inspired by another invention. And what they've done is what they've very smartly done is focused on the gap and became really good at addressing the issue and just really execute it perfectly. And I think that's the other thing that leads on to the second point is that you can end up wanting to do lots of different things. And, as most of us as activists and, in the political world is we're very passionate about everything, rightly so. But think about, where are the gaps? Where does your skill set lie? And think about what role you have individually and how you can pull in people that have other skills that can really sort of build that coalition that you need and the alliance that you need to sort of take on these issues.
And that leads me to a follow on, which is, how do you succeed in the role you're doing? What does success look like for you in politics? What is your theory of change when it comes to being a leader? I think, you're someone that exemplifies collaboration, authenticity.
Yeah.
I think for me, that feels like the two things that you really sort of come from you very strongly. What else do you sort of bring to the table that is going to drive the change we need to see?
Yeah, so I think definitely, the collaboration point is really important, because I always say that because, one of the great things about my job is going around London, you meet incredible, people, organizations who've got so many, they're already doing the work. Like forget City Hall. We don't have the ideas. So many people already in like so many communities are doing incredible things. So the job for us is how are you able to connect dots into providing the sort of the framework for them to sort of work towards, and give them the certainty that they know that when they're making investments or they're sort of like creating ideas or they're putting things into action, that is feeding as part of a bigger picture, and it gives them that clarity. The second thing, so it's that vision setting. The second thing is the enabling factor, which is like, one of the powers that I have and the mayor has is our convening power, and is the ability to bring together people, or for you to open up doors for you in a way that, for example, might be much more difficult. Like when I used to run My Life, My Say, be certain doors just be very difficult to open the doors. But, one of the privileges I have as being deputy mayor is that often you don't get ignored by people, like I remember Thames Water. As a cabinet member in Hackney, trying to get FaceTime with Thames Water was so difficult. I became deputy mayor, literally wrote to them on the second day because there was concerns around the prices being hiked for Londoners. The next week after that, I had a meeting with the chief exec. And I was like, wow, this is a big change. But the point I'm trying to make to you is like, we have the ability to be able to basically enable Londoners, organizations and thought leaders. And that's much more sustainable in the long term. I think the other thing that's really important is, and what people want to see is, slightly what I alluded to, but it's around that vision setting. And what I mean by vision setting is that, it's like, it's not just reactive politics, but it's a real sense of like, okay, where are we heading to? People want to have a certainty of where we're heading to. And I think, that's one of the key roles that I could play in my role.
Fantastic. So I think we've come to the end, unfortunately. Just final question from me. This is obviously your second year, I think, in a row at JLM Conference. What do you hope to be able to report this time next year when you come back? What's the hope for this year? And then track forward, what's the hope for the future for you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would really want to work specifically with you on, Rafi, and sort of the JLM movement on is how do we engage? Like my job is trying to engage as many different communities on this agenda and trying to make it work for communities, understanding the different complexities of all of our different communities in London. And I think, coming back next year, I would want to have like real tangible projects that we've done with the Jewish community around sort of the green transition, and particularly focus on the sort of the benefits focused transition. So whether it be around the work around sort of jobs, whether it be around the green skills agenda, whether it be around the work we're going to be doing around circular economy. I've just been appointed as chair of Free London, for example. I would really want to be able to come back, have real tangible projects and say, here is X, Y, Z, and here's what we can build to. But more importantly, also like spending the next sort of like within the next 12 months as well, like being able to have actually setting up forums where we can actually have these discussions and understand, for example, what are the needs of the community? How would they want to better engage in this conversation? What are the existing relationships at City Hall? Because there might not be any existing relationships. And I think that's one of the things that I would love to do.
Fantastic. Well, I think that brings us to the end. Mete, it's been a real privilege and pleasure talking to you, hearing all about your story, particularly your background and family life. It's incredible, powerful stories that you told us. So thank you so much for doing this. And
until next time.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to seeing this on TikTok.
So Rafi, what a great conversation. What were your reflections?
Oh, it was fantastic to really get to know Mete a bit better and to hear about his life and his backstory and what's driven him through all the most amazing campaigning work that he's done into this role that is now huge. Like, we really didn't go into it enough, but Mete's scope of work as the deputy mayor for climate is huge. He's doing so much. He's got climate resilience, he's got mitigation, reduce emissions. He's thinking about retrofit, he's thinking about circularity. He's got this massive job, and he's 32 years old. And he is the most inspiring, warm, authentic character you're ever likely to meet. So I was really grateful to have the opportunity to chat to him. Yeah, what did you make of it?
I agree with you, Rafi. I thought really impressive, really authentic, just terrific person conversation. What was really struck me was the success he's had with My Life, My Say, and how he's getting people involved in activism, making democracy kind of vivid. And the thing that actually stuck out for me was how he spoke about democracy and politics being fun and how we could make it fun. And some of the suggestions and examples he gave around involving Tinder, for example, involving line bikes, is really all what it's about, really, is making politics and democracy accessible. So rather than it's something that's alien and done by old people, it's something that is living and breathing. I mean, politics at its essence is ruled by the people, and so it needs to include.
How rare is that, though? Isn't that so rare? Like creativity in the political realm, like, you know, youthful energy, relationship, personableness, talk to people on their level. I think as people, as followers of the news and you know, followers of the political agenda, you don't get that. And I think Mete is really special and unique in that regard. And maybe that's something that's really important for the agenda that he holds and that he's looking after. Like in London, the climate, energy, and the nature agenda is all about communities. It's all about engaging communities to get them to, you know, see other opportunities of a change of behaviour, to see the opportunities of retrofit and, you know, green spaces and, so, you know, the circularity business models that we've talked about on this podcast. And I think he's really got a chance at being somebody that can kickstart and then, you know, bring some energy to all those opportunities in a way that maybe other traditional politicians wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, 100%, because I think one of my observations of politics today, again, is that it could be quite staid, quite boring, lacking in energy. And I think sort of creativity, imagination, energy is so important.
Why is that? I think one of the big reasons for that is just how hard it is to be a politician, like how hard it is to make decisions in a world in which, you know, the macro forces are so challenging and your levers of change are so limited. And so it takes personality, it takes character, it takes relationship to actually be able to feel like you're doing something. I think that's the sort of unique sort of recipe that you can bring. Switching gears, how did you feel about doing our first live podcast in front of studio audience? How did that work?
I love it. It's great to be in front of people, to be involving people. We should do much more of that, Rafi.
It was great to actually be in person. This is the first podcast we've done something in person, and it was amazing. It was amazing.
I really enjoyed it, and I'm so pleased that we've obviously got our dates confirmed for the O2 Arena next year.
Exactly. The Impact Equation on Tour coming to an arena near you. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Raf.